Have you ever felt like you were treated as if you no longer had any value just because you got older? I did, and it wasn't from a stranger on the street. It was from my own daughter. I arrived home after a doctor's appointment she herself insisted I make, and my world was gone. My furniture, my books, my photos, my husband's paintings, everything was gone. Every corner of the house felt like an empty echo of my history. When I stared at her, not understanding what was happening, she blurted out without even blinking, "Old people don't need so much stuff." For a second, my body froze. I stood there, still looking around like someone waking from a nightmare, but I was awake, and this was really happening. My daughter, the girl I'd held in my arms, whom I'd shielded from the world so many times, had erased every memory of my home, of my life, like so much junk. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever felt the weight of ingratitude from the one you loved most? I don't know if it was the silence, the absence of objects, or the absence of myself in that empty room. But at that moment, something inside me cracked. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a dull ache, a lump in my throat, a silent question. At what point did I stop being seen as a person? Stay with me until the end. You'll understand how I realized in time to protect myself, and what this box. Here, look, the one in the corner that she didn't have the courage to open. What she kept inside wasn't just old paper. It was proof that I was never weak. I was just silent. In those first few minutes, while she justified herself by saying it was care, that she wanted to organize the house, that I didn't need so much space, I only heard one other thing. You're a nuisance. You've become a piece of furniture, one we feel entitled to donate, throw away, or sell without asking. You know, I've always heard stories of mothers who raised their children with sacrifice, who gave up their own lives and ended up forgotten, treated like a burden, but I never thought I'd be one of them. We believe that all it takes is loving deeply, caring well, giving everything, and that's enough to be respected. But the world changes, and sometimes those who should protect us the most are the ones who erase us the most. It was there, in that silence filled with absences, that I saw everything clearly. She didn't just take my furniture, she took my history, my roots, my identity, and she tried to dress it up as good intentions, but she forgot one thing. That box in the back, the one she didn't touch because she thought it was worthless. Inside, there's something that will change everything, but that, I'll tell you now. She didn't open that box. Maybe out of carelessness, maybe out of fear, or maybe because, deep down, she knew there was something there that couldn't be sold, something priceless, something that carries who I am and everything I've experienced before becoming just her mother. Inside that box were letters. Letters from her father, from when he was still in the military, photographs of our first pieces of furniture, bought little by little with the money I earned from sewing in the wee hours of the morning, the first hairbrush she ever used, a drawing of Jake, my grandson, saying I was the magical grandma. She didn't know, she had no idea, and that hurt more than any material loss. If anything in this story has upset you, leave a comment below to tell me what bothered you most. I know I'm not alone. I've read so many similar stories in the comments of these videos, and that's why I keep sharing them, because every like, every subscription, every story shared here helps this message reach other voices that have also been silenced. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content, real, profound, and necessary. If you feel this story is more than entertainment, if it touched a memory of yours, or reminded you of someone, click like and subscribe. There's so much more to be told, and you'll want to be here when I open that box, because what was inside changed everything. I never thought the sound of silence would be so loud. It's strange to say, but that day, as I sat on the borrowed sofa, the only piece of furniture left, the emptiness spoke to me more than any scream. Picture frames were gone. The bookshelf my husband built with his own hands was gone. The armchair I rocked my grandchildren in, the coffee table I always promised to sand down one day. Everything was gone, sold, without a note, without a warning, just the echo and the box. That box, as simple as it was like an identity vault, a place where I still existed entirely, not for its usefulness, nor for its role as a mother or grandmother, but for the mementos I myself chose to keep. And it was in this detail that I realized the difference between memory and attachment. She thought I was attached to objects, when in fact I was connected to my history. My name is Mildred. I'm 76 years old. I've been a seamstress for over 4 decades. I've sewn wedding dresses, school costumes, dining room curtains. My life has always been made of thread and patience. Every stitch I made was a piece of someone being cared for, but no one asks the seamstress what she wears when she hangs up her scissors for the last time. No one wants to know what's left of her besides the scraps, and I don't blame my daughter for that. At least, not completely. She grew up watching the strong woman who made everything happen, but who never put herself first. I was one of those people who wakes up before everyone else and sleeps last, who serves the hottest meal to someone else and takes what's left, who postpones her dreams to pay for her school uniform. And maybe, just maybe, she learned that I could always manage, that I didn't need much, that I could handle everything, even being forgotten. But what she didn't know was how much it all cost me, because there's one thing no one talks about aging. It's not the body that weighs you down, it's the silence. It's the feeling of no longer being consulted, nor considered, of being called upon only when it's convenient. And suddenly, you're no longer the voice of experience. You're just its uncomfortable presence, as if the time you've lived is worthless, as if wisdom has an expiration date. Seeing my empty house was like watching myself slowly disappear, as if I were disappearing without a sound, as if it were a goodbye without warning. But that afternoon, sitting in front of that box, a new word formed within me: transformation. Because then I understood that either I let myself fade away, or I would rekindle my presence. Not with shouting, nor with fighting, but with a decision. And decisions, when they come from silence, have a power that no one can imagine. That night, I picked up the box, opened it slowly, and pulled out every memento, as if I were sewing my soul back together. Every piece of paper, every photo, every note, the behind-the-scenes story of my journey. Things no one saw, but which held it all together. While she slept in the next room, I unraveled the red ribbon that wrapped her father's letters, the ones he wrote while on assignment abroad, words she never read, hidden truths about what truly kept us going all those years. There, in that box, was the proof of who I was, and still am. It was more than memory. It was structure. And when she saw the contents in the morning, something in her changed. Not because of the objects, but because of the shock of realizing everything she didn't know, everything I never told her. And that now, she could no longer unsee. Write the word structure in the comments if you got this far and understood what this box really represents. She took me to the hospital under the pretense of a simple checkup. She said it was important to check my blood pressure, my routine exams, those things that age supposedly demands. I went calmly. I trusted her. She was my daughter, the only one who still lived nearby, the one who always said she was taking care of me. But there was something strange about that day. She seemed in a hurry. She avoided eye contact, changing the subject whenever I tried to strike up a conversation in the car. But I, as always, kept quiet. We learned to silence a lot of things over time, especially our intuition. I stayed in the hospital for a few hours. Nothing major, an EKG, blood test, waiting in the hallway, talking to the nurse. When I returned home, my house was no longer mine. It was clean, cold, almost a stage. The familiar smell was gone. The bare walls seemed to scream. There was no longer the sound of memories, nor the comfort of the mess that only those who live there understand. The closet was half empty. The china cabinet was empty. The sewing box was gone. My grandson was the one who told me. He was sitting on the porch, head down. He looked at me with those restless eyes, like someone who knows something's wrong but is still trying to find an explanation. He said his mother had told him it was all for my own good, that old people don't need so much, that she was just organizing the house. She just wanted to help, Grandma. But his voice was shaking. He knew, and I knew too, that wasn't care, it was control. You know that feeling of being treated like an object in your own home, like a piece of furniture someone decides to replace, move, or discard. That's how I felt. Not like a mother, not like a woman, but like something old, something disposable. The betrayal wasn't just the absence of furniture, it was what it represented. It was the decision made without consulting me, her certainty that she knew what was best for me, even without listening to me. That's the hardest part. The arrogance disguised as protection. The mentality that infantilizes the elderly, as if living longer were synonymous with losing autonomy. The cruelest thing is that this betrayal comes dressed in good intentions. It's for your own good. You don't need this anymore. It'll be easier this way. And we, who have spent our entire lives deciding, fighting, falling, and getting back up, are reduced to someone who needs to be guided. They forget that we still think, that we still feel, that we still have desires, preferences, a history. They ignore that the body may weaken, but consciousness remains alive, pulsating, witnessing everything, including our own erasure. That night, lying in a bed that was no longer mine, I realized the impact of that decision. It wasn't just about furniture. It was about identity, about dignity, about a hidden truth that, until then, I'd refused to see. My daughter saw me as a burden, as a mission to be accomplished. And that changes everything. I stayed awake all night. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just thought. In silence, I reviewed every choice, every sacrifice I made for her. I remembered all the nights I skipped sleep to take care of her fever, the times I saved money at the supermarket to pay her school fees, the Christmases I pretended to be happy just to see her smile. And now this, that indifference packaged as care, that lonely decision made by someone who thought they knew me, but never asked who I was after I turned 60. I stared at the wall for hours, the one that once held the picture frames, the one marked by time, the old nails, the crooked pictures. That wall, now empty, seemed a perfect metaphor for how I felt inside, naked, invisible, but something inside me began to move, a small movement, as if my soul were beginning to realign itself, as if, little by little, the feeling of powerlessness was giving way to another more firm, more conscious, more indignant. There, in that silence, a decision was born, and that decision would change everything. If this part touched you, write the word here, in the commence decision. That early morning, lying in a bed I no longer recognized as mine, I stared at the ceiling with the same steadfastness I'd stared at it my entire life. A dense silence filled the room, not the usual nighttime silence, but a silence that carries weight, that has form, that occupies space. It was the sound of everything I'd never said, of what I'd been putting off, of what I'd swallowed with a smile, so as not to cause confusion. And there, between the creaking of the old fan and the gentle rustling of the tree outside the window, I felt the first crack in the shell that had kept me quiet for so many years. That wasn't just another night, it was a breaking point, a kind of invisible divide between the woman who had suppressed herself to maintain harmony and the woman who now wanted to exist fully, not to confront, not to attack, but to restore. Because I understood, finally, that dignity is not negotiable. And if my daughter saw me as outdated, outmoded, irrelevant, then I needed to show who Mildred was behind the grandmother, the mother, the silent woman who never imposed anything but always held everything. It was at that moment that the turning point was born, and it didn't come like an explosion. It came like a low, discreet light, igniting a dark corner within me that I had already forgotten. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reunion, reconnection with my voice, with my presence, with the part of me that still breathed, even muffled by the layers of silence imposed throughout life. I got up slowly, like someone waking from a sleep too long. I walked to the hallway mirror and looked at myself more closely than I had in years. The marks on my face weren't just from time. They were from the days I had to choke back tears to keep from breaking down in front of my children. From the moments I made myself strong so as not to scare anyone. From the countless silent sacrifices. But now, those marks had another function. They were a record of my journey, and every journey deserves respect. It wasn't about the furniture anymore. It was about what I represented. And if my daughter thought she could make decisions for me, then it was time to show her that I was still the author of my story. No longer a supporting character in the plot she wanted to write over my skin. I spent the next few days observing. No confrontation, no judgment, just observing. Every word she used to justify herself, every gesture that betrayed her discomfort, every silence that tried to hide her regret. I saw it all. And, for the first time, without fear, it was curious to note how the dynamics of the house changed after that. She avoided eye contact. Perhaps I had sensed something had changed within me, and it had. The old Mildred, submissive and adaptable, had given way to a new version of herself, more attentive, more whole, more willing to protect her story. I didn't need to raise my voice or justify myself. Presence was enough. Just being there, with poise, with firmness, with that new mindset that emerges when we understand our own value. not as a social role, but as a human being, as a woman. In the days that followed, I began reorganizing my inner spaces. Small things, like returning to brewing my coffee the way I like it, relighting candles she'd said were unnecessary, and putting back on the wall a portrait she'd put away so as not to pollute the space. These actions, however small they seemed, had immense significance. I was returning, not to the same old me, but to a version that now understood the importance of being present, even when everything seems to be pushing toward oblivion. That turnaround had no audience, no applause, but it had an impact. It was transformative. And when transformation begins from within, it can't be ignored for long, because it overflows in gestures, words, and eyes. And that look, my daughter felt it, and I realized that if you've ever felt like you needed to find yourself again after a wound, write the phrase here in the comments. I came back to myself. I didn't say anything, not then, not when I saw my portraits piled in a corner of the garage, like weekend trash. I also didn't react when I noticed my old wedding album was missing from the shelf. I continued serving her tea the way she liked it, continued asking about her work, continued helping with lunch as if everything was normal. But inside, I was no longer the same. It was as if I'd suddenly put on the right glasses and was seeing everything clearly, every gesture, every omission, every little clue to what was happening behind my confidence. I needed time, and more than that, I needed proof, so I began my plan in silence. I'm not one to shout or confront in anger. I've learned that the most powerful truths are those that surface slowly, at the right time, quietly, but with impact. I grabbed an old notebook hidden behind some blankets and began writing every trip she made in the truck, every phone call she made secretly in the hallway, every box she took from the back room. I even recorded the name of the used furniture store that appeared twice on her credit card statement. I never imagined I would use my mind with such precision again, but it was as if a new purpose re-energized me. I also started collecting receipts, the ones she didn't tear up and that were lying around the house. I learned to take pictures with my cell phone, something I'd previously only used to look at photos of my grandchildren. At first, my hand would shake and the focus would miss, but I got the hang of it. Over time, I created a small gallery of images that told a story she'd never confess out loud. Every sale, every amount received for something she swore she'd donated or discarded was there, stored with the date, location, and proof. For weeks, I was an actress. I played the same character she thought I was, a quiet, docile, submissive elderly woman who had no idea what was going on around her. But inside, I wrote my own script. And it wasn't a story of revenge, it was a story of justice. Because there's a huge difference between retaliation and revelation. And I wanted revelation. Little by little, I gained allies without their knowledge. The guy at the store who carried my china cabinet told me, without realizing it, that he had bought more pieces from a nice lady who sells everything cheap. He thought he was complimenting me. Little did he know what those pieces represented. I also wrote down his name and kept it. Each step of this silent journey brought back a part of myself I didn't even know still existed. I was in motion. And it wasn't the physical kind of movement, but an internal, profound one. A shift in mindset that showed me that, even at 76, I was still capable of action, of thinking strategically, of positioning myself with elegance and firmness. This phase of my transformation was marked by self-control. It wasn't easy to hold back the tears, contain my indignation, or remain calm, but it was necessary. Because I knew the right moment would come, and when it did, I would be ready. Ready not to destroy, but to show. To show clearly, with evidence, with dignity. There was a morning when, while making coffee, she said to me, matter-of-factly, that it must be nice to live with so little, without having to worry about mess. I just smiled. She had no idea what I was preparing. And somehow, that gave me strength. Because knowing something that others don't gives us an advantage. And, more than that, it gives us back control. I didn't want her to pay with pain, but with awareness. And awareness, sometimes, only comes when we're confronted with the truth we've hidden for so long. I kept recording every little contradiction, every vague justification, every awkward silence after a direct question. All of this entered my notebook, my phone's files, my memory. And, little by little, I began to weave my plan, like someone sewing by hand, patiently, stitch by stitch. Because when the right time came, I wanted nothing to escape. Write the phrase here in the comments point by point, if you also believe that it is in the silent details that the real strength of those who observe before acting resides. The street was different. The neighborhood was different. But as soon as I walked into that used furniture store, I felt as if I were crossing the threshold of my own home, not my physical home, but the one that lived inside me. It was a cramped space, piled high with antique objects, smelling of aged wood and a forgotten past. I entered by chance, or perhaps instinctively. Something pulled me inside as if to say, "Come see." I walked slowly among glass cabinets with opaque glass, tables with marks from old glasses, chairs with wobbly legs, but each one told a story. It was like being surrounded by gentle ghosts, fragments of lives someone once loved dearly, but now they were there, waiting for new eyes, new hands, or simply waiting for the end. That's when, in a corner near the window, I saw it. My closet, the one where I hid the family albums, the document folder, the letters I never had the courage to throw away, the dark wood with carvings that only my husband could make. I knew every mark, every groove. It wasn't like him, it was him. I approached, with my heart in my throat, as if touching a time I thought was lost. I ran my fingers over the surface, as if apologizing for having missed it. The salesman approached and, smiling, said, "This came from a rich house, full of history. A lady brought it. She said she wanted space. She said it was just junk, rubbish." The words stabbed in like a knife. I almost couldn't respond. I just nodded, held back the tears, and stood there, staring at the cabinet like someone staring at themselves years ago. How many times I'd bent down in front of it to retrieve documents. How many photos had been stored there with such care. How many notes from the children. How many bills paid with sacrifice. How many memories hidden in the drawers. It wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a testament to my journey, and now it sat there, among so many orphaned pieces, waiting for someone to take it to a home that wouldn't know its history. I sat in a worn chair nearby and remained silent for a few minutes. I needed to compose myself. I needed to understand what this was, awakening. And it was more than longing. It was the pain of erasure. The pain of realizing that something so intimate, so built over decades, had been discarded so easily, without a glance, without a consultation, without the slightest respect. The impact of that reunion wasn't just the piece, it was what it reminded me of, that everything taken from me wasn't just material, it was symbolic. It represented my life, my dedication, my presence in that home. And there, among the abandoned furniture, I reconnected with a hidden truth. She didn't understand who I was. She didn't know what those things meant. Perhaps she never knew, and that hurt more than any physical absence. I stood there for a while, watching people come and go. Some laughed, some chatted, others ignored everything around them. I felt invisible among them, like the closet, and that comparison was too strong to ignore. I was like that piece of furniture, useful for years, present in everything, but forgotten. The moment they stopped seeing my value. But there was a difference. I was still alive, I still had a voice, and now, I was learning to use it. I stood up, thanked the salesperson with a tight smile, and left the store with tears in my eyes. I didn't buy the cabinet, not yet, but I left with something more precious, the certainty that every memory they tried to erase was alive inside me, and that, even if no one else could see it, I knew the meaning of every detail. As I walked home, I thought about how many other women must have felt the same way, how many stories were piled up, forgotten, sold, how many identities were erased in the name of practicality. And that day I promised myself that I wouldn't let mine disappear like that, not without recording it, not without showing who I was, still am. If this passage brought back any memories for you, write the word here in the comments. Presence. It wasn't just a reunion with a piece of furniture, it was a reunion with myself, with the part of me that had been quiet for so long, trying to be discreet, trying not to disturb, but also with the woman who was always there, recording, feeling, remembering everything she did for that house, for that family, for that daughter. Sometimes, we just need an emotional mirror, and that day, the mirror came in the form of a forgotten closet, and as painful as it was, it showed me that I was still whole, that the story they tried to hide still pulses within me. If anything in this story has upset you, leave a comment below to tell us what bothered you most, or what touched you most. Sometimes, a simple sentence you write here can reach someone who's feeling the same pain and doesn't know how to put it into words. Every comment, every like, every new subscription here on this channel helps this message reach more people who need to hear that they're not alone, that what you've experienced has value, that what you feel is legitimate, and that there's still room for these truths to be spoken. Your participation here is what keeps this conversation going. This space only exists because there are people like you on the other side, feeling, remembering, reflecting. And if you want to continue following real stories, full of emotion, strength, and revelations, this place is also yours now. Let me tell you what happened the next morning, because that's when something changed in her eyes, and I knew, without her saying a word, that my silence had made more noise than any scream. She came downstairs, as she did every Sunday, with the same controlled expression, as if nothing had ever happened, as if the silences were just details of living together. But there was something in the air that morning that couldn't be explained with words. Everyone was there. My other children, my grandchildren, 2 neighbors who always came over for coffee. Nothing explicitly planned, I just let it happen. I invited them, as one would invite them to an ordinary moment, but inside, everything was ready. I delicately set the table, laid out the crocheted tablecloth she'd called too old, and served coffee in the porcelain teapot she'd insisted on hiding because it didn't fit in with the house. Every choice on that table was a memory, and every detail carried an intention. I waited for the right moment. I let everyone settle in. I said little, I smiled enough, and then I stood up slowly, with the same silence I'd been building for weeks. I walked to the corner of the room and returned with a small box. It wasn't the one with the red ribbon, it was another, one I'd saved just for that moment. Inside were copies, photos, receipts, printed messages, records organized with the same precision with which I'd sewn wedding dresses in the old days. I placed the box in the center of the table. No one understood at first. Their eyes met, trying to guess what it was. Then, with the calm of someone who no longer needed to prove anything, I began to speak. Not with anger, not with accusation, just with the truth. I told them what had happened. I explained how I'd discovered it, how each missing object had been registered, sold, catalogued, often without my consent, sometimes with white lies disguised as good intentions. I spoke about the value of memories, about the meaning that goes beyond the object, beyond its function, about how each thing taken without discussion was, in fact, a part of me carelessly ripped away. She tried to laugh at first. She said I was exaggerating, that it was sensitive old lady stuff. But when I started showing her the papers, the dates, the conversations, the amounts received, her smile faded. Silence fell like a thick cloud over the room. One by one, faces fell. The grandchildren lowered their eyes. The siblings glanced at each other. The neighbor tried to hide his embarrassment, and she turned pale. It was then that I took the letter out of the box. It wasn't long. I'd written it in the silent early mornings. It was direct, not to hurt, but to show, so she could understand, in so many words, what it meant to be invisible in her own home. What it meant to be discarded, in the name of practicality. What it meant, after all, to grow old, surrounded by people, and still feel alone. I read every line without trembling, and in the end, when I folded the paper and looked into her eyes, I needed nothing more. Tears streamed down her face as if, for the first time, she realized the impact of her decisions. There was no argument, no apologies, just silence, which now changed in tone. It was no longer the silence of erasure. It was the silence of truth being digested. I stood tall, unbroken, as if each word spoken had given me back inches of height, as if this woman everyone saw as fragile had finally shown her with shouts, but with clarity, with self-respect, with dignity. The letter remained on the table. She didn't take it back. No one dared move for a few seconds, and in that interval, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Justice. Not the kind that humiliates, but the kind that clarifies, the kind that restores space, the kind that shows, even unintentionally, that some things can't be erased, that no matter how hard they try to silence a story, it always finds a way to be heard. If this scene made you want to applaud silently, write the phrase here in the comments with clarity and respect. She didn't answer, not the next day, nor the days after. She avoided eyes, left home early, returned late, always with hurried steps and lowered eyes. The woman who had always spoken over everyone else, who made decisions as if born with unquestionable authority, now walked as if treading on fragile ground. And in a way, she truly was. Because when trust is broken, no title of daughter, mother, or boss can sustain the same position as before. There was a long silence, but this time it wasn't mine. It was hers. The most impressive thing was seeing how the bonds shifted. My children, who had always been careful not to leave me alone, now looked at me with different eyes. They asked me more questions, listened to me attentively, and included me in their decisions, as if they had suddenly realized that I wasn't just an aging woman. I was a living story. And now that they had witnessed the impact of what they had ignored for so long, they wanted to make amends. Not with words, but with actions. Jake, my oldest grandson, was the one who surprised me the most. A teenager who barely looked up from his cell phone, who responded in monosyllables and kept saying that grandma talks too much. One day, he came to me with a drawing in his hand. He'd drawn me in a cape, like a heroine, and in the corner, he'd written, "The strongest woman I know." When I read that, I had to suppress the lump in my throat, because there was a recognition I never asked for, but which now made it all worth it. Karen, for her part, began to walk away, not by expulsion. The door had always been open, but when someone finds themselves in front of a clean mirror, sometimes they choose to turn away. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain anything. She simply withdrew from the emotional space as if realizing she could no longer pretend there. And I didn't demand an explanation, because I've learned that, often, the other person's silence speaks louder than any justification. What struck me most about this process wasn't the pain. I already knew that. It was the silent transformation. The internal shift that doesn't scream, but imposes itself. The change of place, of perspective, of presence. And that can't be bought. It can't be asked for. It's earned. I began to occupy my home again, but this time in a different way. Before, I'd taken care of the corners, so everyone felt comfortable. Now, I decorated with what made me feel good. I unboxed the memories I still had, bought a piece of furniture similar to the one I'd lost, arranged flowers my way, and left photos scattered around. Each object became a delicate statement. This house has a story, and so do I. The visits changed in tone. Now, the grandchildren sat next to me, asking about the photos, wanting to hear what it was like back then. The neighbor, who always brought cakes, started sitting down for coffee. And I, who had so often withdrawn, realized I had gained something. I hadn't even known I'd lost: respect. Not the kind of respect imposed by fear or hierarchy, but the kind of respect born of admiration, listening, and recognized presence. The kind of respect that sustains true bonds, that creates roots instead of walls. And that is priceless. I didn't feel revenge. I felt justice. And this justice didn't come with scandal. It came with consequences. It came with the law of return, the law that doesn't need to be announced, but arrives when we remain firm, coherent, present. And it was at this point in my journey that I realized the greatest strength lies in continuing to be who we are, even when they try to erase every part of our history. If this excerpt touched you, write the phrase here in the comment. Force, even though the house is more alive with my reorganized presence and small gestures that now have meaning. There are moments when loneliness insists on appearing. I sit at the table with my coffee, stare at the empty spot where she used to sit, and feel as if part of my history is suspended in the air. The conversations of Sunday lunch have returned. The grandchildren ask questions. The siblings bring news, but there is a chair that remains empty, bearing witness to the absence of my furniture, of the objects that held important memories. And it hurts. The silent victory I achieved with dignity did not erase the pain of what was lost. There is no turning back that can erase the mourning for something that was once part of us. An internal transformation, however powerful, coexists with loss. This journey has been made of firm decisions, a renewed mindset, and emotional reconstructions. It also has behind-the-scenes tears that no one sees. I came with resilience, silent strength, and a reaffirmed identity. But I still miss the antique furniture that reminded me of my husband's constant presence, of the nights we'd look through family albums together. The house breathes differently, today, more respectfully, more consciously. But I still miss the voice the furniture carried with me, a silent yet living voice that the objects represented. And perhaps this is the complexity of life. you conquer a new space, gain new attitudes around you, regain a veiled respect, but still carry a delicate melancholy for what was ripped away, without warning, without explanation. Dignity and mourning coexist. Recognition and longing go hand in hand. The mindset that sustained me during these months brought strength, clarity, and revelations about who I truly am. Far from the forgotten figure many wanted to paint me as, but I can't ignore the emotional impact that still pulsates when I pass by the room where the china cabinet used to be, or when I open the window where the morning sun streamed in on the old sofa. Sometimes I find myself reviewing the record of what happened, thinking about how the hidden truth of that sale became so visible, how seemingly harmless decisions can erase entire parts of a life. And I feel the pain of not having yet recovered all the symbols of my history, even though I know they remain with me in my heart, because the memories that truly matter aren't born in objects, but in the moments we live. But objects help us remember. I understand this more clearly now. My eldest grandson, when he calls me the strongest woman I know, doesn't know how much that comforts me and also cuts me to the core. He sees the strength, but doesn't see the lack, because much of what I built has been made invisible. The memories remain, but their representation is hollowed out. This part is a wound that still needs to be embraced, that calls for reconciliation between the new presence and what was taken away. And I realized that true victory isn't in recovering everything. True victory lies in acknowledging the pain, accepting the longing, and still moving forward. In continuing to be who I am, rebuilding my inner and outer space with conscious choices. In receiving respect again, in words and gestures, but without expecting the past to resurface. In cultivating a new presence, without erasing the grief. Meanwhile, I continue to live this journey with a different perspective. I consciously look into the void, acknowledging what has passed, but I continue creating, because the journey isn't just about what was taken. It's about what I can still bring, about what legacy I want to leave for those who come after, and about how silent decisions reveal more than any loud protest could. If this part resonated with something within you, the reflection on loss, dignity, and reconstruction, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Presence, as someone who recognizes that being whole includes taking care of what still hurts. Every object has a story. Every detail, no matter how simple, carries a fragment of who we were, what we lived, what we felt. When someone decides that something no longer has value without asking, without listening, without respecting, they are saying, without words, that that person's life can also be discarded. And this is a wound that doesn't bleed on the outside, but burns on the inside, as if every memory has been pushed into oblivion. It's not about the piece of furniture. It's about what the piece of furniture meant to me. When my daughter said, "Old people don't need so many things," she wasn't just talking about objects. She was erasing my history before our very eyes, calling me invisible, without using that word. And I wonder, how many Mildreds are there out there? How many stories are shoved into boxes that will never be opened? How many voices are silenced, for fear of seeming repetitive, too sensitive, stuck in the past? But what if that past is the only thing that still gives meaning to the present? The journey thus far has taught me that aging isn't about disappearing, it's about continuing to exist in a different way. And that wisdom lies not only in what we accumulate, but in what we manage to preserve even when everything around us tries to erase it. Every memory preserved is a piece of identity saved. Every gesture of respect returned is a step toward the humanity we've forgotten. Because the impact of an action isn't in the size of the object, but in the size of the silence it creates afterward. I didn't tell this story to cause pity. I told it because there's something urgent about it all. Because what happened to me happens every day, in other homes, with other muffled voices. And perhaps, if just one person rethinks how they treat their elders after hearing this story, it would have been worth exposing it all. Because every human being carries a narrative, and when we devalue that narrative, we devalue what is most human within us. That's why, today, my every gesture is a silent manifesto. The way I tidy my house, the care I take when lighting an antique candle, the way I look at a teacup of this is memory in motion. It's discreet resistance. It's a way of saying, I'm still here, I'm still made of everything I've lived. And, above all, I still have the right to be remembered as I am, not as others think I should be. There are days when the weight of what was lost speaks louder. When absence screams in the spaces where once there was laughter, conversation, life. But on those days, I take a deep breath and remember the woman I needed to be to get here. The silent strength that moved me, even when everything around me told me to keep quiet. Because the hidden truth of our story is this: we are made of loss and permanence, and both deserve respect. If you've made it this far, it's probably because, like me, you believe that stories matter, even the ones almost no one wants to hear. If at any point this video reminded you of someone, or even yourself, leave a comment below. This message was from May. Read everything with care, and every word shared here makes this conversation even more human, more alive, more necessary. If this kind of content resonates with you, subscribe to the channel. This way, we can continue building this space for listening, remembering, and transforming together. And if you felt this connection, that like on the video helps more than it seems. It's what makes this story reach those who need to hear something like this today. There's a video here that covers this topic. Click and follow along with me. There maybe it'll speak to you too.